Unit 8604, The Forgotten Atrocity. To understand Unit 8604, we must step back to the late 1930s. After Japan's invasion of Manchuria, it established Unit 731 in Harbin, China as the hub of its biological warfare program. By the late 1930s, additional units were created across occupied China, including Unit 100 in Changchun, Unit 1644 in Nanjing, and Unit 8604 in Guangzhou. Unit 8604, officially the Epidemic Prevention and Water Supply Department of the South China Area Army, was established around 1938 to 1939. Its headquarters were located on the campus of Sun Yat-sen University's medical school in Guangzhou. Why Guangzhou? Most historians agree it was chosen because of its strategic importance as Japan's southern base in China. Some scholars also argue that the city's large civilian population provided both cover for operations and, allegedly, potential test subjects. It is historically certain that Unit 8604 was part of the wider Japanese biological warfare network. What remains debated is the extent to which it carried out human experimentation on the same scale as Unit 731. Part 2. Purpose and Structure. On paper, Unit 8604's mission was epidemic prevention and water purification. This was a common cover story used by Japan's biological warfare units. Confirmed documents show the unit was divided into multiple sections: bacteriological research, plague cultivation and anatomy, water purification, animal breeding, and administration. It employed several hundred personnel at its peak, including doctors, researchers, technicians, and guards. Its research focused on dangerous pathogens, including plague, cholera, typhoid, and dysentery. Some records confirm that plague fleas and rats were bred here, paralleling activities at Unit 731. Where the evidence becomes less clear is in its use of human subjects. Survivor testimonies and Chinese post-war investigations allege that Chinese civilians often accused of petty crimes or suspected of resistance were used in experiments. However, compared to Unit 731, far fewer Japanese documents survive to prove the full scope of this work. Thus, while it is factual that Unit 8604 engaged in plague and epidemic research, its direct involvement in large-scale human experimentation rests mostly on testimonies rather than surviving Japanese records. This is one reason many of the unit's activities are still shrouded in mystery, but these witnesses' testimonies help to expose some of the truth about this gruesome unit. Part 3. Experiments and Atrocities. According to survivor accounts and Chinese investigations, Unit 8604 carried out experiments strikingly similar to those of Unit 731. Allegations include deliberate infection of prisoners with plague, cholera, or typhoid, contamination of food and water, and exposure to fleas carrying plague. Some testimonies claim vivisection. Dissecting victims alive without anesthesia was performed to track disease progression. These claims are consistent with practices documented in Unit 731, though direct written proof for 8604 is scarce. Outside the lab, local outbreaks of cholera and dysentery around Guangzhou during the occupation were attributed by survivors to deliberate contamination by Japanese forces. Some historians caution that wartime disease outbreaks could also have been caused by poor sanitation and displacement, but the possibility of deliberate spread remains debated. In sum, while allegations of atrocities are numerous and consistent, the documentary record is limited. This makes Unit 8604's crimes harder to quantify with certainty compared to those of Unit 731. Part 4. Broader Impact. What is beyond dispute is that southern China, already devastated by famine, bombing, and displacement, also suffered waves of epidemic disease during the Japanese occupation. Chinese sources and survivor testimonies attribute many of these outbreaks to Unit 8604's activities. Tens of thousands may have been affected, though the exact toll directly linked to the unit is not firmly documented. The impact on morale and resistance was undeniable. Epidemics destabilized communities, emptied villages, and left survivors traumatized. Whether every outbreak was deliberately engineered remains debated, but Unit 8604's presence and plague research certainly contributed to the fear of invisible, man-made diseases. Part 5. Aftermath and Cover-Up. When Japan surrendered in 1945, Unit 8604 was disbanded. Compared to Unit 731, far fewer of its members were prosecuted. A handful of officers faced trial in Chinese war crimes tribunals, but most escaped accountability. Recently released personnel rosters confirm the names and roles of hundreds of its staff, many of whom resumed civilian lives after the war. As with Unit 731, there are claims that some data from Unit 8604 was quietly used by Allied intelligence, particularly the United States. While immunity deals are well documented for Unit 731, specific evidence of such arrangements for 8604 remains limited and debated. Ultimately, the Cold War overshadowed efforts to fully investigate Japan's biological warfare program. As Japan became a U.S. ally against the Soviet Union, many of these crimes faded from global memory. Part 6. Experiments and Atrocities. Unit 8604's primary mission was epidemic prevention and water purification. However, historical records and testimonies suggest that beneath this facade, the unit engaged in activities that went far beyond its stated purpose. Confirmed activities. Plague and epidemic research. Unit 8604 was involved in bacteriological research, focusing on pathogens such as plague, cholera, typhoid, and dysentery. The unit bred approximately 10,000 rats per month and produced up to 10 kilograms of plague-infected fleas monthly, a capacity comparable to that of Unit 731 in Harbin. By 1944, production increased to 15 kilograms per month, indicating a significant scale of operations. These activities were part of a broader Japanese biological warfare program aimed at developing and deploying biological weapons during the Second Sino-Japanese War. Human experimentation. While direct evidence is limited, some sources suggest that Unit 8604 may have conducted human experimentation. Allegations include deliberate infection of prisoners with diseases such as plague and typhoid, as well as exposure to fleas carrying the plague. However, these claims are primarily based on survivor testimonies and have not been conclusively documented in Japanese military records, or the documents that did exist have since been destroyed. Alleged activities. Nanshitu Massacre. Between 1942 and 1945, the Nanshitu refugee camp in Guangzhou became a site of alleged mass deaths among detained refugees. Some reports indicate that Unit 8604 may have been involved in poisoning the refugees' food and water supplies with pathogens, leading to widespread illness and death. However, these accounts are based on survivor testimonies and have not been independently verified through Japanese military documents. Disease spread in occupied areas. Local outbreaks of diseases like cholera and dysentery during the Japanese occupation of Guangzhou have been attributed by some survivors to deliberate contamination by Japanese forces. While wartime conditions and poor sanitation could have contributed to these outbreaks, the possibility of deliberate spread remains a topic of debate among historians. Part 7. Unveiling the Shadows, the Declassified Archives of Unit 8604. In May 2025, a significant revelation emerged from the National Archives of Japan. Previously classified personnel rosters from 1945 were made public, shedding light on the clandestine operations of wartime bacteriological units deployed in China. Among these units was Unit 8604, based in Guangzhou. These newly released documents detail the names, addresses, and prior affiliations of members of Unit 8604, offering researchers a rare glimpse into the nation's covert germ warfare efforts during World War II. The newly released lists of Unit 8604 include names that also appear in Unit 731 records, confirming cooperation between these units. This revelation is a crucial piece of evidence that sheds light on a coordinated network of germ warfare divisions within the Japanese military. While the lack of surviving witnesses and documentation has made studying the activities and research of Unit 8604 particularly difficult, these declassified documents provide invaluable insights into its operations. They offer a glimpse into the personnel involved and their affiliations, contributing to a more comprehensive understanding of Japan's wartime biological warfare efforts. As researchers delve deeper into these newly accessible records, it is hoped that additional testimonies and documents will surface, further illuminating the dark chapters of history. The release of these archives marks a significant step in uncovering the full extent of wartime atrocities and serves as a reminder of the importance of transparency and accountability in historical research. Survivor Testimony 1: Alleged Contamination of Refugee Food Supplies. According to a Japanese soldier of the unit, during the Japanese invasion of Hong Kong from February to May 1942, a large number of Hong Kong refugees were forced to leave the city and fled upstream along the Pearl River into Guangzhou. Most of them were detained at the Nanchitu refugee camp and subjected to inhumane bacteriological warfare. The Japanese army sent planes to bring in Salmonella enteritid disparatifoid bacteria from the Tokyo-based Army Medical School and instructed the unit to put it into their food. The refugees unknowingly ingested the bacteria, leading to a high mortality rate. Survivor Testimony 2: Personal account of exposure to biological warfare. An elderly survivor recounted the horrors of being exposed to biological warfare during the Japanese occupation. She described how civilians were subjected to forced labor and were often exposed to contaminated environments, leading to widespread illness and death. Her testimony highlights the inhumane treatment and the use of biological agents as weapons against the civilian population. Survivor Testimony 3: Impact on local communities. Another survivor shared her experience of witnessing the devastation caused by the biological warfare conducted by Unit 8604. She described how entire villages were affected, with people falling ill and dying rapidly. The fear and uncertainty that gripped the community were palpable, as they had no understanding of the invisible threat that was being unleashed upon them. Survivor Testimony 4: Family members' discovery of wartime documents. Katsudo Shitakegami's curiosity was piqued when he discovered a wooden box containing a large number of old photos showing his late father in his wartime military uniform along with his comrades. The photos also included those of men working in the vicinity of a well and on the riverbank, as well as a sign that reads Epidemic Prevention Section's workroom. This discovery led to further research into the activities of Unit 8604 and its involvement in biological warfare. Conclusion: Unit 8604 is one of the least remembered Japanese biological warfare units of World War II. Unlike Unit 731, whose atrocities were exposed through testimony and leaked documents, Unit 8604 was largely buried by silence. What we know for certain is that it existed, that it conducted plague and epidemic research in Guangzhou, and that it was part of Japan's broader biological warfare network. What remains debated are the full scope of its experiments, the number of its victims, and the degree of Allied involvement in covering up its crimes. By remembering Unit 8604, we not only honor the victims, many of whom remain nameless, but also confront the uncomfortable truth that parts of this history are still obscured. The lesson is clear: war's deadliest weapons are not always bombs and bullets. Sometimes they are invisible, spread by human hands under the guise of science.